Hello, welcome to today's video where we are introducing the concept of energy. But why do we care about it? Ultimately, at this stage of learning mechanics, I'm expecting you've already done some calculations involving things such as velocity or acceleration. One way this might occur is through doing Suvat equations, otherwise known as the constant acceleration formulae. But that involves you needing to know certain values of things like velocity or acceleration, and if for instance you wanted to use the scenario you're dealing with to know what the acceleration value would be, you could use information about forces for the given scenario using the equation F equals ma as part of your calculations. But all of this is assuming that the value of acceleration is going to stay constant for the entire time period you're looking at. But it might not be. It might be variable instead. So, good news, we'd probably already dealt with that before as well, because you can use calculus as part of non-constant acceleration calculations to deal with that. And to find what those equations would be that you're going to use calculus with, well, again, you could ultimately use an F equals ma with variable forces instead. The only problem is, where do those equations come from? How do you know how the forces are going to be varying? How can we model this? To illustrate why this sort of approach might be annoying to model, we're going to take a look at a situation that you might have come across in other areas of mechanics, where you've got an inclined plane and a box on it that's going to slide down the plane. Of course, the box is going to slide down the plane due to the weight of the object, which is then going to decide the acceleration it's traveling down the plane at by resolving that weight force parallel to the plane. In this simple case, the acceleration of the object should be constant, as the weight force resolved parallel to the plane will be constant because the plane is inclined at the same angle throughout. However, in reality, most things aren't going to be traveling in a way that means they're inclined at the same angle for the entire journey. And therefore that's annoying, because it means if you want to be able to work out what the acceleration is, you're going to have to work out what angle the object's inclined at to know how much the weight force is acting parallel to the plane for every stage of the journey. And to know that, well, it's going to be quite annoying because you're going to have to model the curve of the entire journey. And although you can do this, there's a much better way, which is to use energy instead. And therefore that's why this topic's quite important. Basically, it gives us more scope to deal with forces that change depending on where you are. As this video is serving as an introduction to this topic, we're going to start by looking at three classic types of energy that are instrumental for deciding how objects move. These are by no means a comprehensive list of all the different types of energy that could be calculated, but we've all got to start somewhere, right? And so, kicking it all off, we're going to begin by looking at something called kinetic energy, which is basically the energy the object already has courtesy of it moving. Kinetic energy can be calculated by a very simple formula, which is that kinetic energy is equal to half mv squared, where m is the mass in kilograms and v is the velocity in meters per second. And meanwhile, the SI unit for energy is joules, and therefore kinetic energy is also measured in this way. So that's all there is to it. Just plug the correct numbers in the formula and there you go. So let's take a look at an example. We've got a particle with a mass of 4 kilograms traveling at 11 meters per second, and therefore its kinetic energy, which I'm just going to write as Ke to be lazy, would just be half times by 4 times by 11 squared. And that would get us 242 joules as our final answer. Cool, done. Really that easy. But we also need to be able to deal with something called work done, because ultimately the speed or velocity at which something can move can be changed based on external factors such as forces. So to model the effect that forces might have on altering that velocity, we can look at something called work done. Work done can be calculated by doing the force times by the distance that the object travels while the force is being applied. And just like many of these three-letter equations that appears in physics, our quantities have to be constant in order for these formulas to work. This formula is sometimes alternatively remembered as W equals Fd, but that could be quite confusing for some people because W also is the letter used to represent weight in other areas of mechanics, so please don't get confused by that. As work done is ultimately a measure of change in kinetic energy, it is also going to be measured in the same units as energy, which is joules. Force would have to be measured in newtons, and the distance should be measured in meters. But an extra thing you have to watch out for with work done is whether it's providing a positive contribution or a negative contribution to the energy we had before. And to decide that, it's all about looking at the direction of the forces that are creating the work done. For instance, if we have an object that's traveling in a particular direction, in other words, it's moving with a velocity in a particular direction, then if you have a force that's going in the same direction as that velocity, then it is going to be providing a positive contribution. It would be the work done into the system, and therefore any work done in that situation would be added to the energy we had before. Whereas if we have a force that's acting in the opposite direction to the velocity the object already had, then that would be contributing negatively to the system. So that would be work done against the object, and therefore it would be taken away from the energy we had before. So to see this idea in action, let's take a look at a very quick example, which doesn't look quick just because of the words, but anyway, if we read the words, we realize that in this context, we've got a particle that's being pushed along a horizontal plane by force, and therefore, because it's being pushed along, that means it's moving, which means it's got velocity. So for the purposes of my diagram, let's say the velocity is to the right. After some time, there's going to be some additional forces acting on it. We've got a new extra force of 31 newtons that's also contributing towards continuing it to be pushed forward. But then we've also got the frictional force acting against it, because as a reminder, friction is a resistance force, so it means it acts in the opposite direction to velocity, like so. So therefore, what's the work done that's going to be caused by both these forces, considering the forces are acting over a distance of 6 meters? So first of all, we've got the work done in, which is the work done contributing positively to our system. And that's going to be caused by the 31 newtons, because that's acting in the same direction as the velocity. So 31 times by 6 is 183 joules. We then also have work done against our object, because we've got that force of 20 newtons acting in the opposite direction to our velocity. So therefore that would be work done of 20 times by 6 meters, which would of course be 120 joules. But therefore the overall change in energy caused by the work done would be positive 183 for the work done in, minus 120 for the work done against, which means there's an overall positive change of 63 joules. So that's an application of how work done is applied depending on the direction the forces are acting in. But this was an example of an object moving horizontally. Whams if we've got an object moving vertically? Well, as a result, you're always going to be having work done by the weight force, because the weight force is always going to be acting in a vertical manner, specifically downwards. Therefore, if you have an object that's traveling downwards, the weight force would be providing work done that's positively contributing to the system, whereas if the object was traveling upwards, the work done by the weight would be negatively contributing to the energy in the system. However, as the weight force is often not directly referenced in the wording of questions, to ensure that people don't forget it, some people choose to calculate the contribution that weight has to work done by looking at something called gravitational potential energy instead. Gravitational potential energy can be calculated using the following formula, which is that it's equal to mgh, where m is the mass measured in kilograms, g is the acceleration due to gravity, and h is the height measured in meters. But how do we measure height? Well, height can be measured in two main ways. It has to be measured in comparison to some kind of fixed point, such as either ground level, if you know where that is, or if you don't know where the ground is, in reference to the lowest point the object reaches during the time period you're measuring the energy for. Therefore, in that case, the height is acting more as a change in height rather than height measured as a position vector, if you will. However, before I move on to some examples, I want to make it abundantly clear that gravitational potential energy is intended as a replacement for doing work done calculations for the weight force. So either do the work done by weight or do GPE, otherwise known as gravitational potential energy, but definitely don't do both, otherwise you're double accounting for the weight force in your situation. And now, with that very important disclaimer out of the way, let's finish off the video by doing 3 very quick examples for GPE calculations. For each of these questions, we're going to calculate the GPE both before and after the following actions as described take place. So for part A, we're going to start by working out the GPE before, and that could be done based on the fact that M is 7 kilograms, because that's the mass, and we know it starts 3 meters above the ground, so you could interpret the H as 3. So therefore, in this case, we're going to do 7 times by G, which is 9.8 for further mass A level, times by 3. And if you work that out, taking G as 9.8, you will get 205.8 joules, although technically you should round that to 2 significant figures because we're only using G measured to 2 significant figures. Then calculating the GPE after the object has moved so that it is 10 meters above the ground, that would be equal to 7, because the mass is still the same, still times by G, but now times by 10 instead. And that would get us 686 joules. On to part B. This time we don't know where the ground is in relation to our object. So instead of measuring height in relation to the ground, we're going to have to measure it in relation to the point at which the object is at its lowest point for our scenario. Which means that therefore that's going to be at the beginning, because it starts lower and then it's raised 5 meters. So its lowest point is at the beginning, so therefore we could take H to be 0. So therefore GPE before could be viewed as being 0 joules for this question. And therefore, as a result, the GPE after would be equal to its mass of 8 kilograms times by G times by a height of 5, as it's 5 meters above the lowest point it was at for this scenario. And working that out, well, it's just, again, number crunching, you'll get 392 joules. Then on to part C, similar sort of issue. We don't know where the ground is, but this time it's starting up higher and then it's getting lower afterwards. So therefore its lowest point is at the end, and therefore initially it's 2 meters above that, so you could work out the H in reference to that. So therefore we would have the mass of 3 times by G times by H being taken as 2. So therefore that would come to 58.8 joules. And therefore the GPE after this time, it's now reached its lowest point, so therefore the GPE would be 0 as a result. So those were my examples done of how to calculate GPE, and therefore that means we have now introduced the 3 types of energy I wanted to talk about in today's video, which were kinetic energy, work done, and also gravitational potential energy. What we haven't done yet is looked at how these things interact in a context to describe what's happening to a particular object. But that is something we'll save for a future video. For the moment, this was just introducing you to the formulas to calculate each of these things individually. So therefore, with all that said, I'll see you in a future video where we'll be looking at the work energy principle to see how these things all mesh together. Hopefully you found today's video useful, and goodbye.